A few years ago, in my video about the Eternal Cities, I briefly showed that the full and the dark moons weren't two sides of the same celestial body, that the lanes between were home to two separate moons. And I really didn't talk about it back then. I had planned to elaborate on it in a later video about Rani, but that kinda slipped my mind. Then the DLC came along talking about Relana's twin moons, and I've seen some people arguing about what that's all about. And, well, here they are again. The full and the dark moons side by side. The twin moons, they're not phases of the moon. They're not some metaphysical allegory. They're literally two different moons that exist apart from each other. That's a lot more mundane, I guess. Not sure how well known this is by now, but at least back then I didn't see anybody talking about it. Either way, there's still a couple more things to be explored here. First, they're only visible together in this particular location, the Moonlight Altar, and I think that's related to something else I had talked about before. Geographical spheres of influence. Like, different regions are under the influence of different powers, and that's reflected in the environment. For example, flames in different regions can get imbued with different colors, and likewise, you get crimson, golden, and cerulean skies depending on where you are. For me, personally, that dynamic is most prominent in the Windmill Village. You're walking around the Altus Plateau, everything is golden, and you have the Earth Tree in the background. Then you walk into the village, the whole sky gets cloudy and gray, and you can't see the Earth Tree anymore. Then you walk back outside, and it's golden again. Then you walk back inside, and it's gray. Grace has no power over that specific stretch of land. And it's the same thing here, I think. This place, the altar, is under the influence of the powers associated with the Nox and the Eternal Cities, which replaces the usually golden rays beaming down from the heavens for blue ones, and it also makes it possible for us to see the twin moons. And second, despite Ymir's belief that the moon is merely the closest of the celestial bodies and nothing more, I don't think they're just moons. I think they're portals. Like, the oldest reference in this regard comes from the moon of Noxtella, which was the guide of countless stars, and given the Lands Between's history of outer gods sending envoys as stars falling from ostensibly higher planes of existence, then I theorized that the moon of Noxtella was a portal used by the one god of the Eternal Cities for such an end, and which, at least according to my theories, was also used by the Nox in the ritual that summoned the Astels and killed that very same one god. Then we have Rani's dark moon taking her into the Age of Stars. It literally looks like a dark moon, which is obviously relevant given that it's Rani we're talking about. But it is also a literal portal to outer God knows where. And this portal doesn't just look like a dark moon. It also looks like eternal darkness, a space of darkness that draws in sorceries and incantations, a lost sorcery of the Eternal City, the despair that brought about its ruin made manifest. They're all connected. The Dark Moon, the Eternal Cities, the Astels that brought about the ruin. So the moon is figuratively seen as a portal. But we can go even further, like the sun moves across the sky. There's an observable solar orbit in-game. But the moon is geostationary. Its position is always the same relative to a fixed position on this planet's surface, which hints at the possibility that either the moon itself or its current orbit were artificially created. And now, finally, we can build upon this last conclusion and infer that the models found in the Academy and the study hall are accurate in every detail, big rings included. There are ruins scattered across the continent whose architecture resembles that of Farum Azula, but very slightly, noticeably lacking features such as skeletons, arches, stairs, etc., implying a cultural connection while, at the same time, belonging to a different kind of structure. And the thing is, they're consistently uniform. They fit together kinda like a puzzle, and if you put enough of them together, they go around in a circle. Right? These are giant stone rings that have fallen from the sky. The rings around the Caria models of the moon aren't there to represent any kind of orbits or measurements or whatever. They're there because the artificial moon portals used to have giant rings around them, which were presumably destroyed by the ritual of the Nox and subsequent star showers. And one possibility I see here is that the Eternal Cities had used gravity magic to first arrest the movement of the moon, such as Radan arresting the movement of the stars, and then to raise ring sections into place from the surface, kinda like what we see with Farum Azula, keeping in mind that we don't actually know the size and distance of these moons, meaning they could be much closer and much smaller than the Earth's moon, for instance. In fact, there's even a direct connection there that also happens to reinforce my previous theories. When talking about the rule of the Glowmite Queen, I mentioned a connection between Ghost Flame and Destined Death, represented by the Twin Bird Kite Shield. The shield itself is directly related to Deathbird's first via its description. The Twin Bird is said to be the envoy of an outer god, the mother of the Deathbirds, and then by the blue and red feathered branch sword talismans, which are dropped by Deathbirds and mirror the shield's effects. The Twin Bird envoy itself I theorized to have been a reference to the two Astels, who would have been summoned by the ritual of the Nox that killed their one god. And the connection between Ghost Flame and Destined Death comes from the blue and red pattern dichotomy present in both the shield and the talismans, and the Twin Bird depiction found in Farum Azula, capital of the Glowmite Queen's Sun Realm. My Destined Death video explains the different applications of Ghost Flame during that era, and the coexistence of all fire-centric outer gods, Destined Death, Ghost Flame, Fell Flame, and Frenzied Flame, the whole structure of their society, and a whole lot more, but for the purposes of today's theory, we're just focusing on the Twin Bird. Like I said, its depiction can be found in the airborne city of Farum Azula, but the two birds are also present in Raya Lucaria's crest, which I think depicts the portal at the top, the star shower below that, and the ending with the sun, which, along with the Academy's sun engravings and the black sun of its grand library, signifies their allegiance to the Sun Realm. And even before that, the two birds' imagery can be seen in the aforementioned moon of Nokstella. Within this context of this history, This creates a direct connection from the use of gravity by the Eternal Cities in the creation of their portals to the use of gravity by their descendants in the creation of Farum Azula. That later application possibly being exemplified by the red gravity effect created by the sword regalia of Eochaid, which I had associated with Farum in my first Miquella video. Now, before we get to talk about Rellana herself, we need to go over my theories from the first series regarding the origin of her sister Renala. The Albinaurics and the Carians share a number of social connections, exemplified primarily through Loretta and the location of their village underneath the Moonlight Altar. Both groups have a clear relationship that's been broken by the Albinaurics' newfound allegiance toward Miquella. But I think it goes deeper than that. And what first gave me that impression was the fact that we never get to see the Carians walking on their own 2 feet. During During Renala's first phase, we only ever get to see her either floating or crawling, and her... Can you hear the truck outside? Why are you trucking outside? How do you like the model so far? I don't want to edit the audio, I don't want to cut things out. We're just waiting for the truck to go away. Hello, hi everybody. So, yeah, where was I? Yeah, Renala. The first phase, like she's floating, she's crawling, and in the second phase, her body isn't like her actual flesh and blood body, it's a manifestation of it, which sounds superficial until you realize the Sweetings can't walk either. Just like Renala, they can only crawl. Not to mention their pale skins, Renala's in particular, which harkens back to the Albinaurics as well. And it's not just Renala, like this whole we don't get to see their walking thing. We never get to see the other Carians using their legs as well. Rani and Rykard aren't in their original bodies, and Radahn, most of all, is just straight up missing his feet, right? He's the only sibling to still walk around, quote unquote, walk around in his own body, but his body doesn't have feet. Then you have to remember that the Albinaurics are explicitly stated by the game to have been artificially created. Somebody created them for some reason. Now, Albinaurics seem to trace back to the Eternal Cities through the connection between the innate arcanes they use for casting and the arcane scaling of claimant spells, which are the only sorceries to scale with arcane, and then to larval tiers, first through the fact that the silver tier masks increase arcane, and second because their blood just looks like larval tears. I mean, look at it, right? And likewise, the Carians trace back to the Eternal Cities as well, since a variation of their crest can be found on both claimant and night spells. I mean, you have the night spells coming out of the Carian-controlled town of Celia. The way to the Moonlight Altar is through the Eternal Cities. Rani's Dark Moon doubles as an Eternal City cultural artifact. The royal graves behind Caria Manor are the only surface graveyard with glove wards other than locations related to Miquella's research. That was... we've talked about that before. There was ice magic in the Eternal Cities, which is exemplified by the Frozen Lightning Spear spell. There's a statue of an ox swordstress in the Church of Vows, where Renala married Bradagon. I think the connection between the two is pretty clear there. So, both Carians and Albinaurics are connected to the Eternal Cities, and they're also connected to each other, meaning the Carians are the most likely group to have created the Albinaurics, right? Car. But like the Albinaurics, Renala also has pale skin and non-functioning legs, hinting that she shares a physical connection with their nature, which in turn implies she may also have been artificially created. So, we need somebody else to fill the role of creator in this scenario, and I believe that somebody was the Snow Witch. We know the Snow Witch is related to the Carians. Rani first presents herself as Rena while dressed as the Snow Witch, and we later get the Snow Witch set in Rena's Rise. So, Rena is the Snow Witch's name, right? Right? And I think Renala is Rena's daughter, and Rani is Rena's granddaughter. The Nox had intended to use larval tears to create a lord, and the Snow Witch used them to create a queen instead, whom she and Marika had hoped would help bring Rhea Lucaria to heel during their coup against the Gloamite Queen. But Renala had her own goals. Given the act of her creation, it's no surprise the Lunar Queen would later guide Rani to the Dark Moon by the hand, going all the way back to her origins at the Eternal Cities. This is the origin of the first generation of Albinaurics, and this is the origin of Renala. But then, finally, the game decided to throw Relana into the mix. And Relana's feet worked just fine. More than fine. So, while Renala was created, I think Relana was born. There's two sisters. It's just a bit more convoluted than that. Other than all of that we just talked about, the rest of her lore, Lana. Why do you have to name them like that, Miyazaki? The rest of Relana's lore seems pretty straightforward at first glance, right? Relana's helm, remembrance, and twin blades hint that she may have loved Mesmer, so she swore allegiance to the Erdtree and followed him into the crusade. And that's it. Basically, straightforward, right? But it also feels weirdly too vague, even by Soulsborne standards. Like, sure, Mesmer creates a precedent of long-lost relatives tucked away in the Shadow Realm. And there's an explanation for her to be there. But there's a lot going on around Mesmer, while Relana is just kind of there. And the way she's presented too, like all the bosses with some relevance to the lore get an intro cutscene, a couple lines of dialogue, you know, something, anything. But Relana is just there. You're going through Castle Ensis, you start finding hints of this long-lost Carian princess, and when you finally find her, she's just standing on a pond like a broken NPC or something. She doesn't say anything before you start fighting, she doesn't say anything when she dies, she's just fucking there. And then she's just fucking dead. I don't know. It just felt weird to me, personally. And then you start going through her things, and Renala gave her hair. What? Renala gave her fucking hair? Come on. Isn't this weird? Isn't this whole thing weird? Renala gave her hair. Okay, so what gives? Well, there's two parts to reaching a conclusion here. The goddamn hair and the moon gazing grounds. Starting with the moon gazing grounds, there are two such locations in the game. The one where you fight Relana and the one in Caria Manor where you fight Loretta. In the manor, there's a very large round pool of water with chairs around it, which gives the impression people just sat there, literally staring at the moon's reflection on the ground. Which is kinda silly, but as usual, first impressions are often misleading. The thing here is that this isn't the only Carian body of water from which manifestations are summoned. Renala's manifestation is summoned upon a body of water as well. So that got me thinking. What if Loretta, I'm going to start pronouncing her name like Loretta. I don't know, with Spanish, Portuguese, I don't know. What if Loretta, I'm sorry, that's funny to me, wasn't just randomly summoned to that place? What if summoning one such manifestation was the entire purpose of that pool of water? Renala is all the way back at the academy, but she's still the Carian queen. So, just like she shows up in phase 2 of her boss fight, the moon-gazing grounds at Caria Manor would have been used to summon a manifestation of her to that location, so that she could confer with her subjects there. Since she is known as the Lunar Queen, they'd still be gazing at the moon, and this would, in my opinion, make a whole lot more sense than a bunch of nobles standing in a circle looking at the ground. Back to the Shadow Realm, this would mean that, despite Relana having sworn allegiance to the Erdtree, the Carian forces there still kept a channel of communication with Renala back in the lands between. And it might also mean something else. But we gotta talk about the hair first. There are 3, maybe 2 arguments, depending on how you look at it, that we can use to explain Renala's gift of lustrous hair. Regarding the first 2, their purpose is to provide context, so keep that in mind. And they're also outside sources of information, which makes them not canon. That's very important, you should keep that in mind as well. Okay, they're for context and they're from outside the game. So, why would Renala give hair upon her sibling? Well, considering that witchcraft runs in the family, besides Rena and Rani, Renala's mother and daughter, Renala herself was also a witch, since Best Pope Miriel explicitly calls her a full moon witch. Go dog. Then we could take into account that in the real world, there's the belief that a witch's hair holds some of her power. Not just witch's hair, people's hair. And that other people's hair can be used to channel witchcraft as well. We've seen these in other video games like Bayonetta, for instance. That's argument number 1, which segues into argument number 2, which is that while this idea isn't explicitly stated to be canon in Elden Ring, it was present in Dark Souls through items such as the Witch's Locks and the white hair and Velka's talismans. These 2 arguments are kind of the same argument, really, one is derived from the other, right? But I'm presenting them as 2 separate arguments because even though they're both still outside sources of information, The items from Dark Souls are kind of one step closer than anything that's only referenced outside the Soulsborne universe. Kind of, right? Okay. These two are here to give you some context. And the last argument that I'm going to be talking about now, of course, is from inside Elden Ring itself. I think I actually found the hair. I mean, I haven't found the hair that was given to Relana, but I think I found another item that would be a counterpart to the same gift. It's the Primal Glintstone Blade. The Primal Glintstone Blade, it has a tuft of black hair attached to it. Have you ever noticed that? Like, that's a very specific detail and a bit out of pocket for the usual context of that item, but it's there? I don't know. And I was like, huh, well, they use these, the blades, to imbue stuff with their souls. And the moon-gazing grounds can summon your manifestation long distance. What if Renala stuck something like a glintstone blade in Relana so she can manifest herself through it and puppeteer her sister's body? What if that's the gift she gave her sister? Like, neither witchcraft nor puppeteering are foreign to the Carians, and the glintstone blade is found in the Stargazer's ruins next to the bridge where you get the Great Hood saying, "Yes, surely, this is the moon that young Renala gazed upon." Like, that Great Hood, the Great Hood itself is more important for Mikila's lore, but the quote is there, right? Like, the quote wasn't relevant to Mikila, to the theories that I explained about Mikila before, but the quote about Renala is still there, and it's right next to the Stargazer's wings where you get a blade with hair on it. Damn it, Miyazaki. And if Relana had followed Mesmer into the Shadow Realm without orders from Renala, then that could serve as the justification for the Lunar Queen to turn against her half-sister, right? Everything fits. It explains the fucking weird gift of black hair, and like, that's something from a fucking horror movie or a psychopath, right? If Jesus Christ. And it also gives context to the weird thing I had mentioned, where I had expected for a character like this to have some lines of dialogue or something. Like, if she were mute, they would say that. They would tell us that about her, right? Like, that's like, why would she be like that? And like, she doesn't even say anything when she dies, not even a fuck you, old tarnished one. And that's because the Relana that we are fighting is basically an automaton, right? Like, her body was hijacked, but there's nobody piloting it anymore. It's a golem on autopilot. A friend called it a doll with no spark nor soul, which I think it was poetic. And before moving on, there's a couple of side notes for this theory. The first one is kind of an open question at the moment, really. It's something I'm looking into, but I don't know if it will lead to anything or not. Like, there's the Summon Water Village, and the name may imply a practice similar or identical to the Moon Gazing Grounds. And yeah, I think this village is connected to the Carians, but like I said, I'm still looking into it, and it's for a different theory actually. I'm just mentioning it here because it's tangentially connected to what we've been talking about. And the second note is about Mesmer. Like, the game presents the star-crossed lovers theory from Relana's perspective, but it never mentions anything from Mesmer's point of view. But if their relationship was real before she got body snatched by her sister, then that would give some more context to Mesmer brooding in his main cave, right? It's not just mummy issues, he's kind of like heartbroken, which is kind of more sweet from the genocidal maniac, I guess. Yay. Okay. So that's kind of what I had to say about Relena herself, right? Talking about my take on what she is. And to close off this video, I wanted to talk a little about a Carrion related scenario that I found in the DLC that I thought was pretty interesting. Like, when we think about the Shadowkeep, of course we think about Mesmer and his knights, right? The whole place also gives off very strong colonialist vibes that complement the crusade pretty well, I think. I mean, they're genociding their way through the plains of the Shadow Realm, but Hildy urged that the specimens be preserved, and Salsa refused to burn down an old ruin at the risk of his own life. Fuck the people, build museums. Got it, Mr. Colonizer. Another prominent feature of the keep is the parkour. There are no stairs or elevators leading to Mesmer's dark chambers, and the platforms leading directly onto the beams give the impression this mode of traversal was built into the architecture of this place, which presumably would make the higher levels more defensible. I'll give them that. And as difficult as they have made just getting around the Shadowkeep, the security for some areas go even beyond that, like the elevator leading down to the Black Gate in the hinterlands, whose door has been sealed shut. You can't get to that elevator through regular means. You're not supposed to go there. The only way to get there is through the back section, which, in turn, can only be accessed through the now flooded church district. And here's where it gets interesting, because even through the back section, you still weren't supposed to be able to reach that elevator. The only reason you're able to go to the hinterlands is because of Carrion ingenuity. Okay, so first, I need to point out that, notwithstanding the infirmary ward, all the bodies in the specimen storehouse are of dead mages. Not Mesmer's flame-casting shadow mages, just good old lands between mages. Second, the first area of the back section immediately after the entryway had one such dead mage holding the Carrion Trusting Shield, and that room is lit by blue flame candles. The blue flames are relevant because, as you may have noticed, the color of ambient flames have a tendency to change according to the location, like blue flames in Liurnia and red flames in Mount Gelmir, for instance. So, the Shadowkeep used to have a heavy presence of Carrion mages, and the back section in particular seems to have been their own little nook of the building, especially considering that the Carrion-controlled Cathedral of Manus Meteor is right there on the way to the church district. But the church district has been flooded and the mages are all dead? The fuck happened there? Why is everybody dead there? Well, you see, the back section itself is actually very small and self-contained. The only reason you can use the back section to access the hinterlands is because the Carrions built their own clandestine path to it. The way out of the back section starts with a hole on a wall. A literal hole on a wall, where the shelves have been emptied. This leads onto a makeshift plank walkway going around the outside of the keep. Then, up there in the rafters, we see more makeshift planks placed along the way that ultimately takes you to the elevator leading to the Black Gate and the hinterlands. The Black Gate is kind of a red herring in this context, since Commander Gaius is supposed to be a Carrion soldier, but is also explicitly stated to have been Mesmer's friend and the leader of his men. The hinterlands, though, is interesting, because despite the Shaman village, I just thought of something for another theory. I'm sorry. I'm not editing this out. The hinterlands, though, is interesting because despite the Shaman village being the focal point of the area, it also leads you to the Finger Ruins Ymir sends you to. It has a 3 Sentinel boss fight where you can summon Yolan, and it also leads you to the top of Rabath's Rise, where you find Ymir's secret doll. Ooh. And that's not all, because besides that elevator, from the top of the rafters you can also jump down into a room, leading you directly to the Black Chamber, effectively bypassing the entirety of the storehouse. And, lest you think this is just a game design shortcut, you can summon Yolan for the fight against Mesmer as well. So, now we have this clandestine pathway leading the Carrions to places that they shouldn't have access to, a Carrion adjacent character antagonizing Marika's forces, and a whole bunch of dead Carrion mages. Many of them are found in the possession of items that wouldn't normally be associated with them, such as Blast Bone Shards, the Fire Serpent Incantation, the Fire Knight Hilda Spirit Ashes, Embers of Mesmer, and Fire Coils. So, what's the conclusion here? Well, since the Carrion Trusting Shield was Relana's, and since she was possibly having an affair with Mesmer, then the back section was probably given to her for that reason, right? It was their love nest. Then, since she was body snatched by Renala, she as in Renala, puppeteering Relana, probably ordered the Carrions stationed there to spy on Mesmer, explaining both the makeshift pathway and the mages stealing away with Mesmer stuff. And then, finally, these spies were made and the Fire Knights just killed the shit out of all of them, as they are wont to do, and maybe they were snitched on by Gaius, I don't know. Yeah. Like, this may not be the most glamorous bit of story in Elden Ring lore, but this is peak lore hunting right here. Right? Like, this is the level of attention to detail I have come to expect from Miyazaki and his team. You barely need to read any item descriptions to figure this shit out. It's almost all of it just environmental storytelling. This hole on the wall, planks of wood, and dead bodies with weird loot make this world feel more lived in than most other AAA games manage to do with like 100 bullshit locations and their hundreds of NPCs stuck on their bullshit loops. In my personal opinion. This may not be my favorite Soulsborne game, Elden Ring, but I've come to love this game because of this kind of shit right here. How can anybody not love this game? So, this is what I have on Relana at the moment. There's not a whole lot about her, to be honest, which is part of what I was talking about before, actually. But I think I did want to talk about the Twin Moons because I think there's a lot of room for confusion there. And I wanted to talk about Relana's current, like, existence, what she's become, a doll basically, because well, I thought that was interesting, and because the gift of black hair was too weird not to talk about. And that last bit about the keep too, it adds context to Relana's lore, and it was just a bit of interesting lore hunting that I stumbled upon. So yeah. Just like before, I want to address another question from Patreon. Kyle asked me about the omniscience of the narrator and whether descriptions reflect their bias, like the Miranda Sprout ashes that say, do take care of the little darlings, and the toxic mossling, round and plump like a darling infant. And the answer I gave them is that I think they are all biased, yes, but sometimes that bias can be like just common knowledge that happens to be correct. Sometimes it can be common knowledge that happens to be wrong. And different descriptions can have their origin from like different groups, like the Miranda Sprout stuff. They might come from knowledge derived from the perfumers, maybe, I don't know. And like, so sometimes the descriptions, the bias, it's coming directly from the people involved, and it's just a pure reflection of the truth. Sometimes they might be lying for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes they might believe the lies they tell themselves. They might just be wrong about something. And I think that in order for me to properly answer this question, to myself even, really, I would have to sit down, go through and categorize all descriptions one by one. It's one of those things I've always wanted to do, but you know, that's kind of too much, honestly. I don't think it's feasible. But regardless, that's my impression of how descriptions work. Hope that's helpful. Okay, and yeah, that's that, I guess. Thank you all very much for watching. A big thank you to all of my patrons: Sinclair Lore, Balam, Liu Vampire, Sam D, Ball, Taylor Reed, Medium Hat Logan, Derp, Devo, Brain Douche, Mr. Pudding, and Kyle Van Ripper. Thank you all, you guys, like for the participation you've been showing too with the questions and the feedback on all the stuff that we're doing there. So yeah, everybody, please do stay safe, and until next time, see ya. Bye bye.